The following is a Hoop Ball presentation.
Yo, yo, yo. Yeah, hello. Welcome to another edition of NBA Today. I'm your host, Corbin Ford. It has been a hot minute. It's a crazy times, a lot going on, a brief bout of sickness, but I am back. I am healthy. And on NBA Today, we are welcoming our first return guest, and you may hear a lot more from him. I'm going to use him as much as I can while we have him. Eric, writer for the Denver Nuggets. You can follow him at Eric Spyropoulos NBA. If you listened to our last episode, longtime friend. I was co-host on his podcast, the 94 Feet Report, for a while. He was editor-in-chief of that, podcast host there. We've been going through it. In fact, this episode is a fun one because we're going to revisit an episode that we did 2 years ago to this time. And Eric, I got to throw it to you. How you doing, man? And how you feeling about this podcast we're about to do?
Listen, I'm feeling pretty good for now, but I don't know how I'm gonna feel after we get through this podcast because let me tell you, this could be an interesting one. Like you said, we did do a ranking of the young cores. We did it back in March of 2018. It was one of our episodes for the 94 Feet Report podcast. So it's been a little bit over 2 years since we've done ranking the top young cores in the league. It's going to be really interesting because there's a lot has changed obviously since that time. We've had two draft classes that have entered the league, and both of them, brought a lot of talent into the league, as we'll obviously get to. Teams like the Lakers basically, traded away their young core so they could go all in. Then we're also, I mean, it's important that we point it out now, we're keeping the age restriction to 25 or younger.
Mm-hmm.
So players like Embiid, Siakam, those guys are 26 years old, so they technically don't count when we rank the cores for now. And then, you've got natural, like, players that are still eligible, have developed over the past 2 years, some positively and some not so positively. But yeah, it's going to be wild to kind of compare our current list, and then maybe later in the episode, or maybe as we mention each team, we could talk about where we had them in 2018. I don't know, but it's going to be interesting.
It is. I mean, and I think honestly, before we even press on, and I have to hear what you think about this, Eric. Before we even start with our current rankings and get down to it, do we kind of want to run through our ones from 2 years ago and kind of see almost what we had and maybe our brief thoughts on it, and obviously how different they are now, either because the talent or just moves Lakers.
Yeah. All right. Let's start there. This is March of 2018. I'll start with my list in the top three. My top three young cores in March of 2018 were number one, the 76ers, number two, the Celtics, and number three, the Nuggets. I've got our top two are actually the same. So
Yeah.
You had the 76ers and Celtics, but at number three, you had another Northwest Division team, but it was not the Nuggets.
No, and I'm very much embarrassed to admit this. It was the Minnesota Timberwolves. And listen, like, it's funny to try and defend this now. And if you think that's weird, you should imagine having listened to the pod like we both did in preparation for this one, and like hearing my thoughts in, I guess, real time back then on how high I was on Andrew Wiggins. And most of my argument was really built on he's only 23. Like, that was, he's given no signs that there was any upward trajectory in production, but the potential word was still there. And as long as he was, under 25, in my head, there was hope. And I think after that, it was Tyus Jones, who, while still a solid backup guard, is not anyone I'd like to prop up for my prospect list. So it was really Karl Anthony Towns doing the heavy lifting. But I thought Andrew Wiggins was so good as the potential second banana to Towns, that they collectively lifted the Timberwolves over some teams like the Bucks and others that probably should have been ahead of them, if I was really thinking straight.
You know what's funny? I was trying to talk you off that Wiggins Island in that episode. I remember I gave you the question of, like, who would you rather have, Wiggins or Jabari Parker, which is interesting because the Bucks, we actually, ironically, we had different teams at three, but we both ended up having the Bucks at four in 2018. And obviously this was, Giannis had kind of really established himself. I think that was his first All-Star year, but he was not the, MVP monstrous top 2, top 3 player in the league yet. Parker was still considered there, and that's where we had that Wiggins-Parker debate, which is absolutely hilarious talking about it in 2020, where in 2018 it was like an actual like question because obviously they came in the same draft class back-to-back picks. But the Bucks were 4 for both of us. And then we diverged again. So at 5 is where I had the Timberwolves. And at 5, you had the Lakers. And obviously, that'll be very different than now because the Lakers traded their young core to get AD. But your reasoning for the Lakers at 5 and the Nuggets all the way down at 6 in your 2018 list.
Okay, see, I knew you were going to address me over the Nuggets thing. And now listen, for the Lakers, okay. I mean, I'm probably going to make the same argument when I go to the Pelicans, so I almost want to hold it back a little bit. But
True.
For the Lakers at the time, Brandon Ingram I was high on. I almost think I made a Kevin Durant comparison. I really kind of wish I hadn't, but, that was there. Lonzo, Josh Hart. It was pretty much the same group that we know now. I mean, on the Pelicans, with the exception of Kyle Kuzma. But being a Lakers fan, having maybe the purple and gold glasses on, I definitely saw the potential of those players as more than I was getting from the Nuggets, which in retrospect is painful to even say because it's not like those players weren't effective even then and younger. Like almost all that Nuggets team, with the exception of those who've been traded away in the past 2 years, are still eligible and will still be discussed tonight. But it was just funny for me. I thought, hey, listen, Brandon Ingram has the potential to be the best player on this team. I think I made a similar argument for Lonzo. And I thought on the Nuggets side, with the exception of Nikola Jokic, I didn't really see anyone else there. I wasn't super high on Jamal Murray, if I remember. And Gary Harris was solid, but I actually don't feel... Okay, so here's the funny thing, and we're going to talk about this, so I don't want to get too ahead of myself. But, like, if we're going to take those Lakers players, now Pelicans, Laker Pels, whatever the case may be, line them up with the Nuggets players, yeah, for the most part, maybe after, like, the first 2, like maybe 5 through 7 or 3 through 7 would be Nuggets. But I still am not high on the guys I wasn't high on to begin with. And as the Nuggets resident expert here, maybe you can help me with some of these. But like Gary Harris has been weird. Jamal Murray has been interesting. I mean, they've had moments, but like, I don't know. But either way, there's no reason the Nuggets should have been 6, especially not in 2018. And I can't defend that, so I will merely choose to blame my propping up the Lakers on being a little biased.
That's fair. That is totally fair. I want to mention, I definitely want to address those Nuggets questions, but we're also about to talk about them. And as you said, most of their guys in 2018 are still actually eligible for the list, so we can still talk about them there. I do want to mention before we finish with our 2018 list. So I had the Lakers at 6, and then I think we each had 2 honorable mentions that we just didn't rank, but we mentioned them. And I had the Jazz and Pacers, and you had the Suns and the Bulls. So the Suns are going to be factoring into my list when we get to the 2020 list, but the Jazz and Pacers and Bulls are not. So that was just an interesting perspective on where things were in 2018. But like I said, so much has changed. We've had such an influx in young talent through the past 2 drafts. We've had player development. We've had trades. So just to recap, my 2018 list, and then I'll throw it to you for yours. My 2018 list was in order: 76ers, Celtics, Nuggets, Bucks, Timberwolves, Lakers in the top 6. We only ranked 6 back then. And my 2 honorable mentions were the Jazz and the Pacers.
Okay, and then see, mine was the 76ers as well. The Celtics, same thing. Timberwolves 3rd, Bucks, Lakers, and Nuggets. And then my honorable mention, as you referenced, were the Suns and the Bulls. So, yeah, a lot has changed. And this is an interesting thought exercise in terms of players who have, aged out, players whose stock has rose, and players whose stock kind of fell hard, and how that impacts the teams and, where we are now.
It really is. And for this, I kind of my rankings. Technically, I did put together a list of the top 10 young cores for 2020, but basically after 5, I feel like the rankings are so kind of murky and interchangeable. But basically, I tried to focus on actually ranking the top 5. And then basically 6 through 10, I did put them in an order, but I feel like it gets much closer after you get out the top 5. But without further ado, should we just dive right into which team we have number 1?
Yes, I was going to say, as the guest, I need you to go number 1, Mr.
All right.
All the pressure.
Number one, choosing between these top two teams was really hard for me. I went back and
Oh,
forth like a lot, but I did end up going with the Pelicans. Um,
good.
Listen, I think the star power of Zion is almost like too intriguing to pass on for the Pelicans being number one. I do hear an argument for Ja. I think Ja is a really close second to Zion. This is already spoiling that I have the Grizzlies second. I'm terrible at this, but anyways, um, but I do understand. I think that Ja is really close to Zion. I think that with Zion's injury concerns, some could make a case that maybe you'd want Ja for the future. I still think you bank on the star potential of Zion and what he showed in the limited action he had this year was really good. So that the star power, obviously when I look at ranking young cores, I obviously like to take a swing on or maybe bet on true star potential, and obviously Zion has it. But the key thing for the Pelicans, one is Brandon Ingram developing into an all-star level player is really the key for them being number one. If he had a moderate season or disappointing season, I probably would put the Grizzlies above the Pelicans because I really like what the Grizzlies have around Ja. But Ingram developed into an All-Star level player. Lonzo had shown a good amount of signs this year on both ends of the floor. 3-point shot was looking a lot better. Seems more comfortable. And I feel like even though I'm lower on Ingram still than others, his development overall was huge for this young core. And then you get to their other guys like Hayes, like Hart, Alexander Walker, like all of those guys to me project to be nice support players and depth pieces, which is important to have for a team. Obviously, I think
Hmm.
star power is the most important when you're talking about young players, but you obviously want to have some kind of depth, pieces that fit in, etc. But the two things that made the Pelicans number one for me is star power of Zion is just too intriguing to pass on, and Brandon Ingram's development, which was much better than I expected it to be. And those two reasons, with their nice supporting cast, have the Pelicans slightly above the Grizz for number one for me in 2020.
Okay, see, I agree with you on the Pelicans. I also have the number one. For me, it wasn't necessarily that close. And I think the big reason is I was looking at obviously Zion for the Pelicans just far and away kind of this is the thing. We all had faith in Zion that he would deliver, and I feel like in the small sample size that we got from him, yes, you can. I think the way that there's a system in place or a formula that you can have him be like what he already is, the anchor of this team. Uh, for me, being higher on Brandon Ingram than you certainly helps and certainly factors into this. But also, I think that he showed this year being an all-star, really taking over for the Pelicans for the first stretch of the season while Zion was out. It remains to be seen just how well he blends with Zion. That was still a work in progress when the season ended. But at best, I think that, or at worst, I mean, I think that Ingram is playing up to the potential that, I always believed in, that, and others as well, as someone who can be a go-to and is surely to be, maxed out by the Pelicans this season. But it's not even just those two, whose star potential I like right now more than Ja and Jaren Jackson. It's also the guys on the Pelicans who project as useful rotation players in your Jackson Hayes, in your Josh Hart, Lonzo Ball. I feel like he's more like a superstar role player, but he fits more in that rotation place for me. Nikhil Alexander Walker didn't do super great this year, but he's another guy who I look at in that area. And I think you have all this young talent who at best is starting level caliber players. I mean, at worst is starting level caliber players, and at best is like just all-star, perennial all-stars in Zion and Brandon Ingram. For me, they were there. And then Lonzo Ball's kind of the swing piece because I think that he still has the potential. He improved his shooting drastically. He's still an excellent distributor. His defensive numbers are pretty good. His shooting is that swing factor, but I think that he can also step up another level. Maybe, never a person to be like the best player on the team, but someone who could be a really solid second man. And if you already have him alongside Zion and Brandon, for me, the potential there is still enough. I definitely have the Pelicans number one. Number two is harder, and I'm sure we're going to get to that in a minute, but I dropped the Grizzlies down not because of anything that they haven't done, just that I was a lot higher on the Pelicans right now. Just from what I've seen and Brandon Ingram's improvement and the way he just took over. I mean, he made an All-Star team. He's still, 22, 23. That right there just squarely put him up there, and put the Pelicans over the Grizz for me.
Yeah, no, those are all good points. Maybe I did overthink it a little bit. Something, I mean, I tend to overthink a lot of these rankings, and like I said, there's so this. I found ranking the young cores like in 2020, like eh, twice or three times as hard as
Yeah.
2018. Like 2018 was like, there were definitely some clear cut like these teams have got the young cores. You got to watch out for them. But now in 2020, maybe there's been so many tanking teams. Again, 2018 and 2019 draft classes provided a lot of high end talent that's young. Like there are so many teams that make it really hard. And even deciding for number two between number two and number three for me was like a big ordeal because I ended up with the Grizzlies, like I already revealed. But I could have gone either way with the team I had at three based on favoring the high end superstar potential or not even potential because it's basically already been realized for a certain player that I will not name until I get to the third team. I don't want to spoil everything ahead of time. But yeah, I do have the Grizz number two. Like I said, I would take Zion over Ja, but Ja is, clear cut second from the 2018 draft and had an amazing rookie season. I thought he was going to be good in the league, but like I didn't expect him to kind of just already, make his mark so early in his rookie season. And I'm still a big fan of Jaren Jackson Jr. Ironically, he's been more disappointing on the defensive end and more surprising on the offensive end, given his shooting. But that's still, he's still providing value. And I do think that there's like a chance that Jaren Jackson, and maybe I'd even bank on it, is better than anyone on the Pels besides Zion. Like I could see his two-way potential that much in a couple of years. He still needs to work on not fouling. His rebounding has to improve. His consistency has to improve. He has to add a little bit more weight. But I see that potential for him. I'm still a big believer in Jaren, and I think that the pairing of Ja and Jaren fits really well. And then around them, I really like what the Grizzlies have around them as part of their other players in the core. Brandon Clark, I think you mentioned Lonzo being the swing piece for the Pelicans. I think
Yep.
Clark is the swing piece for the Grizzlies. I mean, I feel like a lot of NBA Twitter has kind of realized his, abilities and what he did this season, but I think overall, I think people are still sleeping on him. And, you pair him next to Jaren in the front court, that kind of versatility, enough shooting, enough defense, etc., is really exciting. Dylan Brooks had a nice year. Definitely took some steps forward as kind of as a offensive player. They traded for Justice Winslow at the deadline, who has not played for them yet. And obviously, there's a big injury risk with him, considering how many injuries he's had recently. But I do like him, maybe not in the starting lineup because of the shooting concerns, but he could be like a kind of a six man. He can do it all. He can handle. He can play make. He can score, etc. Good defensive versatility. And then D'Anthony Melton. I mean, I think D'Anthony Melton had a really nice, quiet, kind of underrated season. Obviously, is really good defensively. The shooting is a question mark for him, and he's going to be a restricted free agent, so he might not be a part of the team in the future. But you add Clark, Brooks, Winslow, and Melton around Ja and Jaren, who fit really well together and have shown a lot in their first and second years. The fact that the team was already winning on the back of this young core, they were already in the playoffs, and it was mostly because of this young core. So that's why I have them at number two, slightly above my team at number three.
Okay, see, I think honestly we're too similar right now because I kind of feel like if we have the number two the same, we're gonna have the number three the same. And I've been swinging back and forth on this. I almost want to be different just for devil's advocate to spice things up, because on the one hand, I'm just gonna try to talk myself in and out of this here. I have the Grizzlies second alongside another team that I might choose right now, so I'm not gonna say it because I like. It goes back to, I guess, a conversation that I'm pretty sure you listened to as well on the Dunked On podcast between Nate and Danny over quantity over quality, right?
Yeah.
And right now you have with the Grizzlies two, blue chip studs in John Morant and Jaren Jackson. Great. Brandon Clark being the swing piece and a stable of like good quality young guys who are solid rotation pieces. Alongside, like you said, Justice Winslow. And that's more than the Pelicans as far as the guys who fit into that rotation level play. And then at that point, you're really just looking at John Morant and Jaren Jackson. Now, the team I have next, I dislike that some of their players that made them like if they had, let's say, if the trade deadline had come and gone and they hadn't made any moves, I would be a lot higher on them right now. However, it did, and they made moves, and so I was lower. But with this team here, I do think that, and you know what? I'm just gonna go with it. Number 2, I'm gonna take the Nuggets.
Wow,
Yeah,
we're gonna differ now. We're gonna differ now.
okay, because for me, I just look at these guys, and the way I looked at it, I took each. I looked at the number 1 player, and then I looked at the players after. So I'm pretty sure I know your number 2, and that's solid. But then I'm looking at 2 guys who are prospects to be, as somewhere on the level. One I'm not too high on personally in Jamal Murray, and one I'm very high on in Michael Porter Jr. And I think when you have someone who, could already be debatably one of the best passing big of all time. Like, I don't think it's super crazy to go that far. He is already on the periphery of MVP candidates, at least last couple years. Maybe distant, because obviously it's just been geared that way. But he's there. And then Jamal Murray's been, again, I'm not the highest supporter of him. He's had dips efficiency, especially in the offensive end, but he still has high upside. He better show a little bit more of that with the contract he has, in my opinion. But he's had moments of star potential, at least in my opinion. And then Michael Porter Jr. is the one I'm really high on. Just in terms of the way he's been playing, lighting it up. I think I had got this from Bleacher Report on stats. His first 39 games, he shot 58% from 50% from the corner, and the 86th percentile from 3 in general. He's a big who can also defend a little bit. He's kind of springy. He's in the 98th percentile in block percentage, 100th in offensive and defensive rebounding. I mean, the dude, in my opinion, can be a star. Now, is it wilder to compare to your number 2? I mean, we're gonna have that discussion, I fear, very soon. But I like them. I feel if they hadn't got rid of Malik Beasley, who I was always high on.
Don't get me started on that.
Yeah, wait till you get to the Timberwolves. No, if they hadn't got rid of Malik Beasley, I would have them as number 2, and I wouldn't even look twice. As such, they kind of debated between 2 and 3 for me. And I'm just gonna differ and put them there to spice it up. I have to have one pick that I'll regret in 2 years, and this might be the one. So we're gonna go with the Nuggets.
Well, listen, I hear all those cases. The only thing I can respond with is I don't even have the Nuggets 3. I have them at 4. And at number 3, I think you might be overlooking this. It's Luka Doncic. It's Luka Doncic. It's Luka. Obviously, Kristaps Porzingis and Jalen Brunson they only have 3 players that are eligible, which is this is a perfect thing because you just said obviously that Nate and Danny had that quality over quantity, right? And I'm taking the quality with the Mavericks over the Nuggets, and you've got basically Luka, who's a future MVP. I mean, he's going to be in the top 3 this year at age 20. And by the way, Nikola Jokic finished 4th last year in MVP voting. So he's, obviously was a distant 4th, but, he was already basically in the top 5 comfortably. Probably will be this year, though, even though there's an argument for it. But Luka, top 3 in MVP voting this year, I assume, at age 20. I have no doubts predicting that he will be an MVP in the future. Then you've got Porzingis, who I think is a really good second banana. Obviously, there's injury risk there, and he has some flaws. But I think, and maybe a good question is, considering I had the Grizzlies at 2 and the Mavericks at 3, is Jaren Jackson or Porzingis moving forward? Like, which player would you want? I think it's close. And I think that because it's close, the rest of the Grizzlies core gets the advantage. Like Luka, to me, is comfortably ahead of Ja, but the rest of what the Grizzlies have for their core can make up for that. And that's why I still have them at number 2. And listen, it's obviously shallow behind Luka and KP. Brunson is the only player that is eligible after them, and he projects to be like a backup, a really good backup guard, spot starter kind of player. But Luka and KP, I mean, it's a great fit together. It's pretty easy to build around them, and one of them is going to be a future MVP. Like that kind of talent is way too much for me to overlook, regardless of how shallow it is underneath, regardless of the Porzingis injury risk. It's just Luka Doncic, like my belief in him to be a top 5-ish player, in a couple of years, maybe even by next year or maybe 2 years from now, when he'll still be like 21 or 22. It's like the Mavericks are at 3 for me.
You know what? Okay, so I didn't pick them at 3 for the reasons you had mentioned, as far as like why I would probably not consider them at 3. I think the stable of talent, if I'm comparing Jackson alongside Porzingis at this point, I kind of lean more Jackson. As far as the rest of the young core, it really isn't even a contest for me because I am looking at quantity up to this point. So I look at the Grizzlies; they have several players. I look at the Mavericks, and I see Jalen Brunson. You know what I mean? Like after Porzingis and Doncic. So like this team is a little bit more of a veteran team. Now you're right; the superstar potential from Luka Doncic. I mean, what? Only Oscar Robertson and Russell Westbrook have put together like better regular season numbers than Luka, who at 20 is what? Just under 30 points, under 10 rebounds, and just under 9 assists a game. Like that's crazy. But for me, the reason I put the Nuggets there is that I know I can't speak, and maybe I'm overthinking this. I want to see how Luka does in the playoffs. Okay, I feel like one of those guys who's kind of finding any kind of excuse maybe to pick against them. That's not what this is. But I saw what the Nuggets could achieve. And mind you, they probably, I feel like they had a tough out against the Blazers, but like they they were in the top seeds just like the Mavericks were this year. But we also saw them deliver someone in the playoffs for a very young team that had been there for the first time. You know what I mean? So I think for them it was a mixture of quantity, and I saw more actual, I guess, production that surpassed the regular season. Now, more than likely, Luka's going to light up in the playoffs as well. But for now, I kind of went over a known quantity, and also I just felt like there was more there than the Mavericks. Now, it's weird that I slipped the Grizzlies. Oh, no, I can't disclose my teams. It's weird that I have the Mavericks and Grizzlies fighting for 3 and 4 with me going with the Nuggets at 2. But I took into account different factors, and one was superstar potential from the top player, the second was the quantity, and the third was a relative success up to this point. And yeah, maybe the Nuggets have a little bit of an edge. They kind of got together younger, and they've had more years to kind of gel, even while remaining that young core that still qualifies. But I mean, it is what it is. I didn't make the rules, I mean, I guess we both did, but you know what I mean.
This is really interesting to me because you have taken a complete reversal. I mean, you had the Nuggets sixth in 2018, and you've got them all the way up at second. And in my opinion, I mean, you mentioned you're really high on Porter Jr. My opinion, I mean, and obviously Jokic has continued to develop, into an actual MVP candidate, whereas in 2018 he was still like, we weren't sure how high he could go, and he's shown that he can go really, really high. But really, you look at the other guys, Jamal Murray had a better Jamal Murray took steps forward this past season, or technically this season if it's not actually over, but that's kind of weird to say. But if for people who didn't watch the Nuggets a lot, obviously I watched every single game, so I watched them a lot. But for people who didn't and just looked at like his basketball reference page or some of his counting stats, they think he kind of plateaued, and his counting stats were very similar. 3-point percentage was down, but his defense was vastly improved. His playmaking took steps forward, and I think in the majority of his advanced metrics, they all say that this was his best season of his career. It wasn't the step of development you want in his fourth season, which is another reason why I have him at 4. But he did take smaller steps forward. But then you look at back in 2018, the core when you talked about the Nuggets was Jokic, Murray, and Gary Harris. And what has happened to Gary Harris over the past 2 years offensively, I think he's become better defensively, but offensively what's happened to him has made me lower on the Nuggets core overall. The shooting has kind of fallen off. The ability to attack, the willingness and ability to attack and finish around the rim has dipped. Settling for more floaters, some of the injury concerns, all those things. I know he's been really good defensively, but all those things are kind of concerning elements of his development.
True.
So you look at Murray not taking a huge step forward. You look at Harris, most people would say regressing, and yet it's ironic that you have moved the Nuggets up. But obviously, I haven't mentioned the players that have now joined their young core, most notably Michael Porter Jr. But obviously, I want to shout out Monte Morris, who counts, and Bol counts age-wise. But we obviously, we're not sure what's going to happen there. But
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you. I left out Morris on purpose. There was a Lakers Nuggets game this season where Morris called out the king. You can't do that. So, I mean, I couldn't do it. But he's on my list. Like, I don't want you to think I forgot him. I left him out with reason.
Okay, good to know. That's fair. That's fair. So I think the ranking of the Nuggets core probably depends on how you feel about Murray and MPJ. You said you're lower on Murray, but you're really high on MPJ. I think if one of them becomes an all-star, this could totally be a top 2 or top 3 core because then you have an all NBA first teamer in Jokic, you have a secondary all-star in Murray or Michael Porter, and then you've got solid depth. But overall, I'm lower on both players. I'm lower on MPJ, definitely lower on MPJ than you are. I think I've got a lot of concerns defensively. I've got a lot of concerns. The health concerns are the biggest ones.
Yeah.
And it's hard when you have such injury risks with players that you're trying to project forward while ranking these cores, but they exist for him. And they exist for him probably more than anyone else on this entire list of players that are eligible. And that's scary. I mean, obviously the offensive game is tantalizing. The size, the shooting, the rebounding was really good this season. But there's got to be steps taken defensively. There's got to be a proven track record of staying moderately healthy for me to kind of really believe in this team and put them over Luka or the Grizzlies. Not the Pelicans. I think the Pelicans are kind of safe. But I do think, even though I'm lower on this and I'm rambling, but I do think that the combo of having Murray and Porter, even though I'm lower on them, the combo of having them with Harris, with Morris, and whatever becomes a
Yes.
goal is really valuable, especially in the regular season. And that's where I'll get to the final point, like you already mentioned. They had really good depth. Basically, if we did these rankings in January, and maybe it's kind of projecting forward that Beasley and Hernan Gomez wouldn't be on the team anyways. But if we were doing these rankings, at the start of this season back in October, I would probably have the Nuggets up a spot, or maybe a spot or two, because we wouldn't have seen the Grizzlies play. But they traded Beasley, who listen, I'm really high on Malik Beasley. I don't think he's going to be a great two-way player, but I think he's a dynamic scorer, elite three-point shooter, and is young, and he's got this kind of factor to him where he's not afraid to kind of take on players offensively. And Wancho's, a solid depth piece. But you lose those two guys for nothing that's actually part of the core, because they traded them and basically got players that really either weren't really eligible or just don't really factor into the future. And you lose that depth, and that's why I have them at 4 behind Luka. So, it's interesting to me that you actually you had them 6th in 2018, but you moved them up to 2nd, even though you could argue that 2 of their main 3 pieces of their core have kind of stabilized or regressed in some cases.
You know what? I mean, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, for me, I guess I knew they had, or I know they have, but I don't know. I'm just not as. I guess it just comes down to me thinking. I don't even want to say less about the Nuggets because not about the Nuggets, about the Mavericks, because I'm high on Luka. I don't know. Maybe I'm not as high on Porzingis as I was 2 years ago. Obviously injuries and everything. And then although the Nuggets have regressed and moves like we mentioned with Malik Beasley and such have weakened a little bit, I just think I'm higher on Michael Porter Jr. Even being aware of his defensive struggles. I don't necessarily enjoy Jamal Murray, but I still think he's a solid player, and I'm really high on Jokic. I think that the combination of those three, plus we already mentioned Morris and Bol, for me, equals up to where the Mavericks are right now with Luka. Even though he's great. I mean, I still look at the standings and everything. I'm like, okay, it's not almost like the strength of I don't know. I guess this is like an argument for how good is one individually over several pieces that are substandard. I'd probably take Luka over every player I mentioned on the Nuggets, including Jokic. However, with the combination of them, and then you look back and you just have Porzingis on the side, I just lean toward. I just lean toward the Nuggets. I mean, it's not even like in the sense they were separated by that much, but you already know what you're going to get with them. I mean, yeah, they regressed a little bit as far as Murray and Harris, who just fell off the block. I haven't even mentioned him at all. And it's just because he was one I remember us talking about 2 years ago, and even me saying like, yeah, he'd have to be one of the top shooting guards, but I wasn't too like bowled over with him. But like, he's definitely just his shooting's escaped him. He's definitely fallen off a little bit. But I don't know. Like, I keep trying to talk myself out of it, knowing like against most reason I probably should, just because Luka's that good. But I just am high on the Nuggets core at this moment, even though, like you said, I'm jumping them now after kind of the hype has fallen off. But maybe that's just my personality. Once people start hating on the team or not liking as much, that's when I pick them up and make them my own.
Listen, that's a way to go about it. I mean, the final thing we can move on to our next team, but the final thing I'll say is that when I'm trying to compare two cores, and obviously the Nuggets have more of an actual core, and the Mavericks have a trio basically, but I would take the Mavericks' top two players of their core versus the Nuggets' top two players. So I would take Luka over Nikola Jokic, and I would take Porzingis over Murray. And then,
Mm.
is the combination of MPJ, Harris, Morris, and Bowl? I don't know if we really should count Bowl, but is the combination of that so much better than Brunson that it makes up for the difference between the top two? And for me, it doesn't. But
Michael Porter Jr. No.
no, it doesn't. I mean, I think that Porter Jr. will be a good player. He might end up being an all-star, but I'm also tend to be a little bit risk averse when it comes to players with injury concerns, and obviously Bol has them too. I think Luka and KP, I would so comfortably take them over Jokic and Murray that MPJ would have to become like a three-time All-Star or something for me to like rank the Nuggets ahead of them. And obviously we don't know that now, so I can't do that. It's not fair.
True.
But I just think that the top two of Dallas's core is, Jokic and Doncic are close together. I think that's close, but I think that Doncic plus Porzingis is like, comfortably ahead of Jokic and Murray because of Murray not being a true second fiddle yet. And for me, I'm a little bit too low on the rest of the Nuggets guys to say that it overcomes the difference between the top two of each core. And that's part of me, being more risk averse. But listen, you're taking the quantity. You're taking a mix of quantity and quality where I am really banking on the quality of Luka and KP in this case.
You know what? Yeah. I mean, I'm not, again, for the sake of looking back at this in a couple of years, what was I thinking? I'm not going to change
This
it.
won't be a Timberwolves situation from 2018. All right? You're safe there. Both these teams are good young cores that'll be good for a while.
Thank you. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Thank the goodness for that. But I'm going to keep it that way. Even though I get what you're talking about, it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. I mean, I don't know. I guess I didn't realize how much higher I was on Michael Porter Jr. over Porzingis, who I've just kind of fallen off of, even though he had a good year this year. This is not even a testament to Luka. I just don't know if Luka at this point, and this might bite me back, is gonna overtake the collective team of these guys right now. Some of which are not as good as they were, but I don't know. That's interesting. I'm gonna keep the Nuggets at number 2 and just cross my fingers and hope things work out, like you said, half decent in a couple years time.
That's the way to go about it. All right, so you have, just to recap, I've got Pelicans at 1, Grizzlies at 2, Mavericks at 3, Nuggets at 4. And what's your top 4?
So I had Pelicans, Grizzlies, Nuggets, Mavs.
All
Or no,
right.
Pelicans, Nuggets, Grizzlies, Mavs. No, Pelicans, Nuggets, Mavericks, Grizz.
Wow, so the Grizz dropped to 4. Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And again, I use the other logic in that I'd rather have Luka than either. And then, as much as I like John Morant and Jaren Jackson, I just Luka's carried the team.
I got you. All right, number 5. I'm going east for this one. Boston Celtics.
Whoa.
Boston Celtics at number 5 for me. And the kind of really eligible players that I really considered were Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and the two Williams, Robert and Grant. But this is really about the dynamic wing duo of Tatum and Brown. Both players, I thought, took some really nice steps forward this year. I think both can be and probably will end up being perennial all-stars for years to come. And perhaps most importantly, that's happening at the wing positions, which is, I think, almost provides extra value because of the lack of quality replacement players at that position. I view centers as centers is the most replaceable position. So if you're getting really great play at center, it has to be like dominant, like Jokic, Towns, etc. But when you get dynamic, dominant wing play from Tatum and Brown at those wing positions, I think it almost provides extra value. And similar to the Mavericks, there's not a ton behind them to get super excited about. But I do think, like I said, both Williams, I think, have shown flashes at least. And I think that both, I would probably count on both being somewhat quality contributors or depth pieces. But for me, it's like getting that dynamic wing play from Tatum and Brown to me is so important and valuable in today's modern NBA that I have the Celtics at 5.
Okay, that's solid. I'm a go and surprise you. I'm gonna take the Minnesota Timberwolves. No, I'm just
Woo!
kidding. I'm
Oh,
just.
okay, good. I was about to say.
Oh man, I know. I had to get you one time. I had to get you one time. No, no, no. Okay, so this.
Are you
This.
deferring from the Celtics?
I'm deferring from the Celtics. Yes.
Okay, all right, all right.
As much as Jason Tatum just balled out, you made a great point. Jaylen Brown's been great this year. I'm okay. So it's a team in the East. All right.
Spit it out. Spit it out.
I just don't. I, j- I just think they have more young. Again, this is the. I'm going with the Atlanta Hawks.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, I kind of knew you were going that way once you said it was in the East.
Yeah, it's hard, man, because the Celtics have produced. I mean, the players. I just feel like you have. Okay, so if I had to choose between Trae Young and Jason Tatum, I'm taking Jason Tatum, not thinking twice. If I have to choose between Jaylen Brown and John Collins, I guess I'm taking Jaylen Brown. I guess it's not that hard either. But then Kevin Huerter, DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish. I mean, I mean, and then you have like Robert Williams, Grant, Carson Edwards, Taco for all those guys. I like the Hawks. I just think Kevin Huerter's impressed. He has hit almost 40% of his threes on almost 6 attempts a game. He's a great compliment to Young. Young obviously has superstar potential, even if defensively he's horrendous. I think his pairing with Collins, I hear a little bit of Karl Malone and John Stockton, but I just think that the upside there, and we have to put, I mean, no, he's 25, so I guess Clint Capella still counts. Although he will be 26 in a minute. But anyway, if I'm putting them as well, I just think you have a solid group. And then, DeAndre Hunter didn't have a great year. But he's being developed as a 3-and-D type of guy. Cam Reddish had a horrible year, but I mean, at least up to this point, but he was getting better. And I mean, this is rookie year, so I guess I'm looking more at the potential of these guys over a guy that stood out in Jason Tatum and another guy who's had a great solid season in Jaylen Brown. But afterwards, I kind of feel like it's a crapshoot. I'm not as high on those guys as you argued, and I just feel with the Hawks, you kind of have more of a sure thing coming and a couple pieces that in Hunter and Reddish, if they do come through, hey, so much the better. But even with Young, Collins, Herter, and Capella, I kind of like that.
So I like the Hawks young core. I really believe in Trae is going to be one of the best offensive engines in the league in due time, maybe another year or two. Collins, I like. I think he's sometimes gets a little overrated based on his really impressive counting numbers, the points, rebounds per game, etc. But I do, like you said, I like his fit with Trae. Unfortunately, I'm kind of disappointed that they traded for Capella and Dedmon because I don't think we're going to get a lot of Collins at center in the future, at least for the foreseeable future, which I kind of wanted to see more of. But that's, that doesn't really count for ranking the young core. I do like Kevin Huerter as a depth piece. I think he's going to be a solid starter. And, Reddish, like you said, had for the majority of the year was a disaster, but I looked it up because I was interested. In the second half of the season, basically post All-Star break, he averaged 16.4 points per game, and his shooting splits were 50% from the field, 39% from three, and 85% from the line. So I'm not saying he's going to do that next year for sure, but he clearly was showing in the second half of the season that he can hang, especially offensively. But I thought his defense was actually kind of underrated. For the Hawks, for the majority of the season. So I kind of like him on both ends. And then, like you said, Hunter, it wasn't like a big wow factor kind of season you'd expect, especially after they traded up for him with all those assets, which I didn't like. But his skill set is what you would theoretically look for in a wing. So, I get that. I get why they drafted him. I get his fit on the team. And, I like the young core. Interestingly enough, though, and I'm regretting this. I don't know if I'm fully regretting it. I'm second guessing it. I don't even have the Hawks at 6. I have them at 7.
Wow.
I have them below another Eastern Conference team at 6.
I mean, okay. Whoa, okay, let me guess. 76ers.
Indeed, it is still the Philadelphia 76ers. I listen. I know Embiid no longer qualifies, but
yeah, I was gonna.
Listen, believe me, if Embiid qualified, the Sixers would be above 6. But I still think it's a pretty good group. I mean, I still like Ben Simmons. I think he gets a lot Ben Simmons is one of the most polarizing players, I think, in the NBA, especially on NBA Twitter. But he's an all-star, a comfortable all-star. He's arguably an all-NBA player already. I get that there's fit issues. Building around him can be tough, or maybe not theoretically. Theoretically, if you just put a bunch of shooters and switchable defenders around him, it'd be perfect. But anyways, the fit currently is an issue. But I still think he had arguably his best season in the league in his third year. I mean, he's become a really good defensive player. He's kind of sharpened a couple. Obviously, the shooting has not come around, but he's got sharpened a couple of things offensively. I'm still a believer in Ben Simmons. Matisse Thybulle, I think, is going to be one of the best defenders in the entire league in due time. The offense is more questionable, but as long as he can knock down, catch and shoot 3-pointers and make effective cuts, that's kind of what you need to do when you're providing that level of defense. And then behind them, you've got a mix of guys like Zaire Smith, Quirk Maz, and Shake Milton, who I think all could be quality depth pieces. I think Milton showed a decent amount of stuff towards the end of the season before the suspension. Quirk Maz has shown a couple of things. He's going to be a free agent, so he might not be part of the team, which is kind of hard to project. And Smith hasn't shown that much, but I can still see him being a quality depth piece. So it's basically my belief in Simmons, my trust in Matisse Thybulle being one of the best defenders in the league, and then 3 pretty good depth pieces. And because I've already seen it enough with Simmons, I'm still ranking the 76ers above the Hawks for now.
I agree. Again, you always do a good job putting the argument together. And I mean, it's true. Simmons is a polarizing player. I might be a little more down than you are. Also, Shake Milton had one great game against the Clippers this season.
Yes.
And he was playing. I mean, that game was amazing. Well, before that, too, in the recent stretch, Thybulle, I would hope a little more than, just being an impact level defender. But right now, I mean, he's another solid piece for sure. I guess collectively, I just don't see, aside from Simmons, anyone stepping up. I mean, Zaire Smith, Quirk Maz still, I guess, counts technically. I don't see any of them projecting as stars, whereas the Hawks, in the right situation, in the right scheme, I could see, young Collins, maybe maybe a Reddish. Those guys kind of at their fullest potential. I'm higher on them than I am on the 76ers outside of Simmons. And Simmons, while having star potential, like you said, polarizing to say the least. I'm just not as a fan as I guess I should be or thought I was. But yeah, I mean, it's a solid group, and they have some young guys that are just really effective. So I actually have them looking on my list on number 7. Because I had the Hawks 5 and then I had the Celtics 6. So, I mean, I'm basically echoing a lot of what you had said for the Celtics. Jason Tatum just had himself a season. Jaylen Brown stepped up. I like the pieces on the Celtics a little less than the Hawks, but a little more than the 76ers just collectively. And that's why, my 5, 6, and 7 are Hawks, Celtics, and 76ers. But I think now we get to a more interesting last 3 spots here with our 8 through 10. I'm really where you place a certain team of in my mind, and then also just my own. I guess I'm gonna let you go with number 8. I'm hoping that you consider the Kyle Kuzma and Taylor Horton Tucker, but if you didn't, I'm not gonna hold it against you. But what's your number 8 team, Eric?
So 8 and 9 for me were flip a coin. I don't care who you have, 8 or 9. I've got these 2 teams. It's the Timberwolves, who I technically wrote down at 8, and the Suns I had at 9. But again, just whatever. I could wake up one day and be like, it's the Suns this day, it's the Timberwolves the next day. That's how much these teams basically flip flop for me. I think obviously the Timberwolves young core, obviously it's funny because they're still making the top 10, but back in 2018 we each had them in the top 6. You had them at number 3. I don't want to have to. I'm sorry, I had to bring it up one more time.
Oh my gosh, yep.
But we don't have to talk about Wiggins because he's not on the team anymore. But obviously their young core changed drastically this season at the trade deadline. We already had Towns, all NBA caliber center, dominant player. Defensive concerns, but they're not, terrible. Of course, now they're going to be exasperated because of what they put around him, but that's a whole other thing. But then, obviously, the moves that they made, well, I guess we should start last draft with drafting Jarrett Culver. Pretty bad rookie season. I'm not a big fan on Culver. I wasn't really when he entered the league, and the rookie season didn't really help out there. But the main new piece is D'Angelo Russell. Obviously, capable offensive guard. I think with Towns is going to be a pretty dynamic offensive combination. But my big concerns come on the defensive end and just the ceiling of the team with those two guys leading the way on their big contracts. You know, I think I think offensively, given the core that they have, and I haven't even mentioned, like we said, Malik Beasley. We're both really high on Malik Beasley. What he did, obviously very limited sample, but what he did post trade deadline before the suspension was average 20 points a game on elite volume and percentages from beyond the arc. Showed a little bit more comfort attacking the basket, a little bit more comfort handling the ball. The next thing for him, two things is one, kind of stabilizing and being that consistent kind of third scorer for them, and the second, big thing is improving defensively, because there's going to be a lot asked upon him if he's going to be playing alongside a guy like Russell. Josh Okogie, had a solid-ish kind of season. Just he's like Culver, where I don't get too excited about him. And Juancho Hernan-Gomez, who they traded for. I think all those guys, Culver, Josh Okogie, and Juancho, are basically quality depth that mostly fits alongside Russell and Towns. But I just don't get too excited about any of those guys. So, when I look at the Timberwolves, I look at a team that could easily be a top 10 offense next year, basically on the backs of this young core. Russell, Beasley, Hernan Gomez, and Towns, especially when we're talking about the offensive end. Obviously, Beasley and Hernan Gomez are restricted free agents, but everything sounds like they want to bring them back. So I'm counting on them being back. But the ceiling and the defensive concerns for me are why I continue to flip flop with them and the Suns. But I do have them here.
Yeah, that's the same thing. I laughed when you first brought it up because I have the Suns 8 and the Timberwolves 9. And it was funny because you're right. It's flip a coin, see where they are. The Timberwolves, you're right. For me, it's Carnthien Towns, D'Angelo Russell, and Malik Beasley. That's the core. I mean, they all have their weaknesses. There's also some strengths that I'm pretty high on, but I've definitely tried to be a little more reasonable with the Timberwolves after they broke my heart in 2018. So, I try to have them in place. With the Suns, though, yeah, I mean, I put them up just because obviously Devin Booker, I mean, all-star this year. He was one of the few players to average 27.6 assists, 4 rebounds a game. But he was also for most of the season in the 96th percentile in points per attempt, 92nd percentile at the rim, and 91st in mid-range. And joined Steph Curry and Larry Bird as the only players to meet those averages while shooting 50% from the field and 90% from the free throw line. This was earlier in the season, but he just had a just strong year. And while DeAndre Ayton's had an up and down season, the 25-game suspension didn't help. He was averaging a solid double-double. His efficiency had dipped a little bit, but he's still a guy who, has you root for a strong, I guess, third season or the remainder of this season. And mind you, if a little less than stellar decisions as far as like what you put in your body don't impact his season, I think he has a much better sophomore year. Cameron Johnson kind of seems like he has a low ceiling but a high floor, and I like Mikal Bridges as this just multi-positional defender who is getting a little better in shooting and is pretty solid as far as usage and points per shot attempt. So I like him. Kelly Oubre still fits and had a solid year, and really was a pretty reliable second option at times during the season, with DeAndre Ayton being out as a support piece to Devin Booker. Just all through the year, I'd actually written a piece about just how many times he led them in scoring and rebounding consistently. And then you have other guys like Ty Jerome, Javon Carter, who Ty Jerome didn't have a great year at all. Javon Carter was up and down, but those guys are still young enough and count. And again, it's not like I'm looking at the Suns past, let's say Booker, Ayton, Bridges, and Oubre. Those four, boom. And then after that, I mean, you just put whoever fits in, although Cameron Johnson is a heck of a shooter, man. But aside from that, he doesn't offer much else. And it is kind of wake up one day, you know what? Devin Booker's been in the role, Suns are up. Don't know. D'Angelo Russell's been shooting really well. Here we go. And then, DeAndre Ayton raised up his double-double. It's one of those. Until you get more players on each side stand out enough, D'Angelo Russell's been through a few teams now that we kind of know who he is as a player, and hopefully there's another level to climb, but I don't see it. Carnthien Towns' defensive struggles are going to be there. Devin Booker has a lot to improve on that end, and I just think we need more intel on DeAndre Ayton and Mikal Bridges as well. So it's kind of up in the air, but I think you're right. Whichever way you go, the Suns and Timberwolves seem to be squarely in the 8-9 category.
Yeah, I agree. I'm pretty much going to echo everything you said. It's basically, yeah, Booker, Ayton, Bridges, and Oubre are the main pieces. I'm not really sure what to make of Cam Johnson, Ty Jerome, Javon Carter, etc. I think Carter has shown some stuff to be like a nice defensive backup kind of guard. And Johnson's a good shooter, but obviously I'm not like, oh my God, these guys are so good, I have to rank them higher. But Booker and Ayton obviously headline the group. I think someone's ranking of the Suns, obviously we're basically in agreement. But anyway, in general, I think someone's ranking on the Suns probably depends on how much you believe in Ayton, because Booker, like you said, had a really strong year. He's continued to make a lot of nice strides, especially offensively.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny how, I think Booker almost used to be one of the more overrated players like 2 to 3 years ago with his stats on like a losing team. And now he's like, I think this season became a little bit underrated. Just because of his incredible percentages, his ability to kind of diversify his game with Rubio coming in, things like that. Obviously defense has to improve. It's interesting because like Booker and Ayton is a similar. Obviously, they're different players in both of them, but the ceiling of a Booker plus Ayton led group is kind of probably really similar to a ceiling of a Russell and Towns led group. Towns versus Booker as the number one options on those teams is an interesting one. I'd probably take Towns. Ayton versus Russell is kind of an interesting thing too. So these teams are so like linked together because they've got these two pieces. One's a guard and one's a big, and then they've got some wing players that are filling around them. And I think Oubre and Bridges are quality wings. And like I said, when I ranked the Celtics at 5, that's a big position to fill in the modern NBA is having quality wing play, and the Suns have that in Oubre and Bridges for now. But it's funny how these two cores are so similar to each other. They're led by a duo that has a good guard and a good big, and then they've got some kind of solid wings around them, and then some questionable pieces as you go farther down the core. But I basically echo what you said. Timberwolves and Suns are 8 and 9 in some order. It doesn't really matter. And like I said when we first started this, the ordering for me after like 5 got pretty murky, fast.
Yeah. It's once you have such a solid start, it's just I don't know. It kind of falls off real quick. You're right. And what's funny is the interesting parallels that you drew between the Suns and Timberwolves, because you're right. You have a pretty solid, or at least an offensive engine at guard, and then a big man with some potential who struggles on one end of the floor or the other, or isn't as promising as you would like, but can still improve. Yeah, I can't argue that. But what I will do is go to my number 10 spot, and just break down the young core there. And for me, that is the Miami Heat.
All right. We are in agreement here, actually.
Okay, good. Well, then I guess we can both have a discussion on that. I think clearly Bam Adebayo is just that guy. He had such a strong year, just on all facets of the game, scoring, rebounding, playmaking. And then obviously you have guys like Tyler Hero, Kendrick Nunn, Duncan Robinson still fits that. Derek Jones Jr. had himself a year. These guys, I mean, they've been solid, and what's funny, I mean, and weird is that the Heat have got these guys, the 14th selection. They got one of the NBA's best 3-point shooters in the league right now without a pick. Having Tyler Hero at number 13, Kendrick Nunn undrafted. Like, these guys have been difference makers for the Heat that are so young weren't even lottery picks for the most part. You know what I mean? Or just outside of that. So it's been pretty solid.
Yeah, I agree. Pretty much echoing everything you said. Bam obviously carries this core, and he's going to be so good. I mean, he already is so good. But all the guys you mentioned, Hero, Nunn, Robinson, Jones Jr., who's a pending free agent, that's a nice supporting cast. Plenty of depth. I think Bam could be better than anyone on the Suns, like in due time. Like, I think he could be better than Booker. Honestly, you could move the Heat up to 9, and I wouldn't go crazy arguing against it, because that's how much I love Bam and the perfect big, I think, for the modern NBA. Maybe if he had a touch more shooting, it'd be even better. But, I think he's going to be perfect on both ends of the floor for what the Heat want to do. But the funny thing with the Heat at 10 is that, honestly, like, you could probably replace the Heat with maybe and this is interesting because Giannis still counts. Like, we should address that, because Giannis doesn't turn 26 until December of this year. So, like, that is one thing. Like, what do you do with that? The Bucks core is basically Giannis and Dante DiVincenzo. With the fact that Giannis could leave soon, he's only counts for another 6 months ish. Like, what do you do with that? Do you just because it's Giannis and he still counts on the list? Do you just automatically have them, at 10 and replace the Heat with them? Do you have them higher maybe because Giannis is the MVP, 2-time MVP? Like, I don't know what to do with that. But I kind of went with like, it's kind of like it's not cheating. It's just kind of like it just doesn't feel. It feels weird to just put the Bucks there because of Giannis's final 6 months of eligibility when he could leave, in 2021 if they don't, win a championship soon. But yes, I do have the Heat at 10, and then basically what I did after that is I just listed a bunch of teams that have young players with like maybe a bullet point or two about their core. But I do have the Heat at 10.
Okay, I mean, do you want to kind of just run through those teams? Because I feel like we're gonna nail a few of them just have conversations or where we may. Because yeah, I mean, I don't know if I put Bam above. I mean, I'm still sort of emotionally tied to Timberwolves, so that's not gonna happen. And I like Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton, but you're right, Bam has been really solid. And I mean, there's not even much more to say about it other than what you kind of covered and what was there about the Heat. They just have really solid group of young guys. I wouldn't put them anywhere in the upper echelon, but collectively good. Although with Bam, you have the potential of someone just breaking through and really making their mark as one of the right. He's already a rising star, but just in general.
Yeah, the Heat are, the Heat are the Heat. They're gonna
Yep.
fly under the radar, but they still. I'll keep them at 10 for now.
Also hard.
um,
All right, same thing. So let's kind of just run through those teams.
yeah, so I mentioned the Bucks. This is in no order. Like I'm not ranking these. I just had
Same.
like these are literally just other. I basically looked at the standings. Was like, oh, this team has young players. Let me write them down. So the Kings are there. I'm still really big on De'Aaron Fox, but I'm not big on Bagley, and that kind of ruins their potential for being in the top 10. And Harry Giles, I like his game. I think he's going to be a quality depth piece, spot starter. But the Kings also declined his option, and he's going to be a free agent this summer. So like that's kind of hard to project him being part of the core. But if I wasn't so low on Bagley, the Kings would probably be in my top 10 because that's how much I like De'Aaron Fox. But they drafted Bagley over Luka Doncic, so
I know that's gonna bite them. Kings are gonna Kings, but
oh man,
jeez.
yeah, that one was so egregious. It was like beyond me. But anyways, the Bulls. Listen, Zach LaVine counts, Kobe White, Lauri Markkanen, Wendell Carter. It's a solid core, but you just don't see too much high end potential. I think right away you have to say that Markkanen has disappointed. Whether it's a combination
Yep.
of injuries, coaching, just lack of development, it's been a disappointment. Levine has taken steps forward, but I can't trust him to even be like a Devin Booker or like probably like a Devin Booker would be a nice comparison. He just doesn't. He puts up numbers, but I'm just not sure he can be a real driving engine of your offense if it's going to be a good offense, obviously, which is what the goal is. Kobe White, Kobe White had a really good end or not end, but before the suspension. But I just don't see the super high end potential to be like, oh my God, Kobe White's part of their core. We've got to put them in the top 10 kind of thing. And I like Wendell Carter a lot. Like he projects to be good on both ends of the floor. But again, it's like I think it might be a coaching thing where his offensive game has kind of regressed. Whereas he showed all these skill sets in the draft process and early on, where you thought that this guy could be, initiating, playmaking from the elbows, spreading the floor a little bit, and leads to getting some more mid-range jumpers. And now he catches the ball at the elbow and doesn't even, he's obviously has his back to the rim. He's like, I think it's like kind of a coaching thing, maybe for him and Markkanen. So that is a solid core. But I just think the lack of some of the regression and some of the lack of high end potential has them just as an honorable mention for me. Feel free to interrupt me at any point if you have any other pressing thoughts about these teams, by the way.
For sure. I mean, you mentioned a few that I don't have any like additional thoughts as well as just being solid pieces here and there. Kings for sure are one that I looked at. Larry Markkinen fell so hard for me this season. I'm not sure if it was just obviously injuries that kind of helped riddle that, but he's one. What do you feel about Charlotte? That's a team I'm intrigued by. Just in general.
Yeah, Charlotte's an interesting one because I think they're definitely in the Bulls case where to me they just lack the high end potential from their guys to really be like, oh my god, like see they've got a couple of guys, Bridges, Washington, Graham. I think Rozier still counts technically.
Yeah, almost. Yep, he'll be. I mean, I think he gets out soon. I have to check his age there, but he's there for the moment.
Malik Monk is technically there, but he's obviously had a rough
Oh no, he's
recent.
26. He doesn't count anymore.
Okay, so
March.
it's Graham, Washington, Bridges, Malik Monk. Like
Yeah,
to me, the lack of high end potential is probably what limits them into just being in the honorable mentions category. Like I thought PJ Washington was pretty good this year, fun to watch. Bridges, he projects to be a solid wing, I think, for the future, and Washington could project to be a solid kind of four for the future. And Graham, obviously had a really nice year, arguably most improved consideration, but you know it's kind of like the Bulls, where it's like it's a solid young core, but like for a team that's rebuilding, they don't really have a guy that they're like, oh my god, this guy can carry us to our next good Hornets team. I think that they've got nice
yeah.
support pieces, basically.
I agree. I mean, it's a team. Yeah, it's a team of potentially solid rotation players.
Yes.
And that's what you're looking at. You're right. There's not one person there that stood out, and hence you had the record that you did, an overachieving Hornets team that, aside from that, didn't really bring too much else to the table. So no, I'm totally with you on that one. But for me, let me see. I'm trying to think of another team that I thought we. Okay, if you were leaning between Orlando or Indiana, where would you go? In Orlando, if you're looking at Markel Fultz, Jonathan Isaac, Mo Bamba, and then if you were going more Indiana, I'm looking. You probably still have the Sabonis still counts. Yeah, let me see real quick. I'm just trying to make sure because I put these teams here for pieces here and there that I thought would work. But you have
Sabonis does count,
Sabonis.
yeah.
Yep, Sabonis, Aaron Holiday, T.J. Warren. I think is aged out. He has 26 there. But just off those two, and then if you want to go down the line,
You have
McConnell,
Miles
like
Turner.
he's out too. Miles Turner still counts too. Yeah. So it's weird. I mean, they have an older team, but those guys right there, even with just I mentioned those three for Orlando between Sabonis, Turner, Aaron Holiday. What are you thinking with those guys?
That's tough. Orlando versus Indiana is tough because I don't like a lot of Orlando. Like I'm pretty low on Bamba. Fultz, it was nice to see him, have a solid season, but I have concerns about the limitations of him not being able to really shoot at the guard position at the point guard spot. But I'm so high on Isaac as especially on the defensive end. But I think offensively he's made strides. The injury this year is kind of a real setback for him because he was really starting to kind of take his own. And I think I'd probably take Isaac. I think if you ask me which player would you take among the two teams, I would probably take Isaac first in terms of his potential to be a real game changer defensively and a
Yeah.
solid player offensively. But then it's like once you get past Isaac, would I rather have Sabonis, Turner, Aaron Holiday, or would I rather have Bamba and Fultz, basically?
Yeah.
Um, it does. Aaron Gordon still count because that's kind of a big deal, I think.
Yeah,
I don't
Aaron
get
Gordon's still he's still
Aaron Gordon.
25.
Oh my God, he's only 24 years old.
That's 24. See, that's
My,
what I mean. Like this
oh
is
my God.
dude,
All right.
dude.
Well, in that case, I'm probably taking Orlando just because
Okay.
I already said I'd rather take Isaac as the best player of those two teams, and Fultz, Gordon, Bamba. It's close. Like I'd rather have Sabonis and Turner and Holiday than those three, but I'd rather have Isaac than anyone on the Pacers. So I'll guess I'll go Orlando.
On the low though, Gordon. I mean, at least up to this point in the season, Gordon's been regressing. I mean, all right, look at it. Just on points per game, we're looking at 5. When he first come out, the 9, 12 a game, 17, 16, 14 this year. Like it's been weird for him. I don't really know what to make of it. His 2-point field goal percentage has dropped. Obviously his 3-point percentage has been all over the place. Usually hovering around the mid to low 30s, but his rebounding has been the one thing that's more or less sustained, as well as his assists per game, which is actually pretty good for him, 3.7. But in general, he's been a hard one to kind of evaluate. But one thing I can say that we can probably agree on is that he's kind of underperformed.
It's just I think what happened is that he broke out into the scene early with the dunking, and everyone looks at him and is like, oh my God, like, this guy could be a monster on both ends. And obviously, some of his years were stunted by them wanting to play him at the small forward spot. And then, it's just kind of been a lack of development, whether it's been, coaching has not been good for the development, or maybe just himself not wanting to work on the skills that would really unlock him as a player. I've heard other people talk about him like this guy could be like a Draymond, like a poor man's Draymond Green on the defensive end, like with his athleticism, his size, versatility. But you just don't get that from him when his body would suggest that you could get that from him. And offensively, you haven't seen the true development of the skill points of the game, like 3-point shooting, ball handling. The playmaking has been good. The dunking is almost, it wasn't as exciting this year. I think that maybe he's one of those guys where by 27, 28, almost like a Blake Griffin, where the dunking kind of stops. And then maybe like Blake did, like really late, 28 years old, 29, then he starts developing that three and the playmaking and kind of transitions to another phase of his career. But yeah, he's been kind of disappointing. But I think I'd still probably take the Magic despite that over the Pacers.
I feel you. I guess one of those things was a quantity over quality type thing.
Yeah, and the Pacers have obviously been better this year, but they also have older players helping them. Brogdon, Warren, like you mentioned, Oladipo for a little bit, Jeremy Lamb, Justin Holiday. Like they have more better veterans, I think, or more balanced veteran team to help them be better than the Magic right now. But that one's a tough one. I mean, they're obviously part of this list of other honorable mentions. I mean, what's funny is that you could probably include almost every team in the league in this honorable mentions list, except like the Rockets, who have like literally no. I mean, they have like no young talent to even talk about.
Yeah, that's true.
But almost every team, like I could still name some other teams, like the Cavs, right? Like Darius Garland, Colin Sexton, Kevin Porter, Chetty Osman still counts.
Yeah.
To me, it's kind of like the Bulls core, where it's like there's good players, but like not much high end potential. Like Sexton's become a good scorer, but the playmaking has not been good for a lead guard. Garland had a pretty rough rookie season, though I do like his skill set. Kevin Porter, I think, is kind of the sleeper of this Cavs core.
I agree.
He could end up being the best player of the core, and I wouldn't be surprised. But again, I just don't see the high end potential, which kind of limits them. Rambling on, the Spurs are another team. Yeah.
Oh no, I have to interrupt. I mean, you kind of bypassed the Rockets, and I have to kind of fault myself for doing that as well. But let's not sleep on Isaiah Hartenstein or Chris Clemens. All right, Hartenstein's 21, Clemens 22. They had their moments.
yeah, those two are the only players literally mentioning on that roster.
Honestly,
they have Bruno Caboclo.
I was gonna say you take those three, and that is literally the only players on their roster that qualify. With guys like Gary Clark and Daniel House probably just getting out of it. Well, House is 26, so he's been out for a minute now. But that is literally it. You're right. Like you have the majority 27 and up before you have anyone under 24.
Yeah. I mean, in their division, the Spurs, DeJounte Murray, Derek White, Lonnie Walker, Jakob Poeltl, who's a pending restricted free agent, so maybe he'll come back. Again, I think what we can kind of see as the overarching theme, at least for me, when I talk about these teams in the honorable mentions, is the lack of the high-end potential. Everyone in the top 10, I think, that we ranked, every team in the top 10 had one guy that's like, okay, this guy, has that high-end potential.
Yeah.
Even the teams at the bottom, Bam, Booker, Towns, Trae Young, Simmons, Tatum, all those teams had one person. And for almost all of these honorable mention teams, they don't have a single person that you look at that like, oh my God, this guy could be at the level at some of those guys I just mentioned. So the Spurs are in that category for me. The Knicks are another one like that where, R.J. Barrett, Mitchell Robinson, Frank Ntilikina, Kevin Knox, like that's kind of the core what I considered. Technically Julius Randle, Bobby Portis, and Dennis Smith Jr. qualify, but I just don't even think they're really going to be part of the core, so I didn't even bother listing them. Robinson, really good kind of modern rim running center who defends the rim. I'm not really sure what to think of R.J. Barrett yet. Kevin Knox, I'm basically completely out on, but you never know. He could be a serviceable backup, for the future. And Ntilikina is kind of probably the swing factor for them. Obviously, they're going to add some young talent in the upcoming draft, but I think Ntilikina could be a good depth piece as like a 3-and-D guard. But again, unless someone's really high on RJ, I struggle to see that high end potential from any of their guys.
I kind of agree. It's weird. And in general, I think two teams that you mentioned I thought was interesting. One, you talked about the Cavs a little earlier. I agree, especially with Porter Jr. And it remains to be seen what that. Couldn't talk for a second there. It remains to be seen what comes out of that backcourt. There we are, Corbin. All right. Also, the Spurs too are a team that's intriguing with their talent. Just all over the board. But to kind of close where you were, it's interesting. The Knicks are a weird team. Barrett did not have a solid season, and I don't know what to make of their young talent. I tend to be more on the pessimistic side than positive of the best case scenario for any of them. I guess the only one who I would really give strong consideration to would be RJ, and even he didn't have a great year shooting or as a distributor. Just in general, it was very it was interesting.
Yeah, I'm pretty low on, I agree with you there. And two other teams, mentioning the Raptors. Obviously, Siakam graduated out. So did Van Vliet. They're down to Terrence Davis and OG Anunoby, which is good wing play. Which I rated the Celtics high because of the wing play, and I think OG is good. Davis, I think, is one of the best value contracts and great finds that they had last summer. But again, just not high end stuff there. And the Jazz, it's basically down to just Donovan Mitchell.
He stands alone.
He's literally. But I figured I'd just shout him out right there. But that kind of wraps up the teams I mentioned. The Thunder are kind of like the Jazz, where it's basically just Shea. And a ton of draft picks, which is fun for the future, but they don't count for the core because they're not actually players. But that's kind of wraps up all the teams that I written down. I mean, that wraps up our 2020 versus our 2018 rankings.
I know. I gotta say, again, this has been fun to be able to even come back and look at this, see how our teams have changed. You best believe I have my list saved. I know you have yours and mine, so we're gonna have to look at this again on in 2022 to kind of see where we are between now and then. But thanks a lot, Eric. This has been a lot of fun to kind of revisit and look back on and really just kind of evaluate young prospects and how we look at teams differently and how that argument shifted, from team to team and almost from a tier to tier.
Yeah, I mean, listen, there's few things better to podcast about than ranking young cores, because you either look really smart in the future and you can kind of brag about it, or you look dumb and then it creates plenty of comedic material to make fun of in the future. And then plus, when you're ranking young cores, you get the most kind of arguments and back and forth about kind of philosophies and things like that. So it's always a blast to rank young cores, something we've got to try and have to do every 2 years so we can properly look back at our previous list.
I am totally down for that. So we're going to have to make sure to book it for that coming up. All right, for sure.
Absolutely.
All right. Do you have anything you want to plug, or obviously your great Twitter account, but just in general, anything you want to share with the fans out there, Eric?
No, you can follow me on Twitter at Eric Spyros NBA. And for my writing, you'll find all of that at nuggets.com.
And definitely check out this man's work. It is great. He knows his Nuggets. He knows the NBA. Great content all the time come from him. You can follow me at Corbin NBA if you want great questionable NBA takes that we can then have discussions over. I am all for it. Definitely follow Hoopball at hoop-ball.com for great content there across every team, a variety of podcasts. As the NBA season may be starting, may not be starting, content is still coming out. Our very own Dan Besbris is still leading Fantasy NBA Today over Yahoo Final Ranks, everything about the news, all that coming out. So definitely make sure to follow that. Also, check out Hoopball on Twitter at Hoopball for, again, great content, not only for your fantasy perspective, but just great writing and great team and NBA coverage. Aside from that, we will be back very soon with another episode of NBA Today. You'll probably find me with Eric. You might find me going solo. The mystery will remain until you hear from me again. But take care, stay safe, and I will talk to y'all next time. All right, y'all.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.